Welcome back to the lab. For 18 consecutive weeks, we've worked together to build a world-class, perfectly automated financial system. Right? We've optimized the mechanics, we've dialed in the efficiency, but today we're tackling a totally different kind of problem. We're addressing a psychological virus. It's basically a glitch in your internal software that has the power to completely override every single perfectly calibrated system we've built so far. We are going after the ghost in the machine.
So, lab members, as we step into week 19, we're officially entering the behavioral lab. We're going to run a clinical experiment on your own internal programming today because, well, what we've discovered is that having the absolute perfect index fund and this flawless automation setup, it doesn't really mean anything if your brain is constantly stuck in survival mode.
Let's dive into this anomaly. Think about it. Why do you feel poor when the data definitively says you're winning? Like, why does someone with $1 million sitting in their portfolio still physically stress out over a 50-cent price hike on lettuce at the grocery store? It sounds crazy, right? But this is exactly what we call the scarcity mindset. And it's the exact reason why even the smartest, most data-driven investors eventually end up self-sabotaging.
Here is today's clinical protocol. We're going to diagnose the invisible ceiling and your survival circuit. We'll install the abundance framework, totally dismantle the zero-sum fallacy, and finally, execute a real-world lab task. Okay, phase 1, the invisible ceiling. This is truly the ghost in our financial machine. The absolutely crucial point here is that perfect mechanics simply aren't enough. You can push your efficiency ratio as high as mathematically possible, but if you're operating under this lingering feeling that there is just never enough, you're going to hit a glass ceiling. Seriously, you could have a portfolio that literally outperforms Warren Buffett, but if your survival mode keeps you trapped, you'll still be sweating over a $2 upcharge for guacamole. To actually progress, we have to shatter this ceiling so you can stop thinking like a hoarder and start thinking like an owner of the future.
Phase 2. To understand why we do this to ourselves, we need to diagnose the actual hardware of our brains. Let's look at the biology behind the survival circuit.
Basically, our ancient, outdated software is failing us. For thousands of years, humans lived in a state of absolute life-or-death scarcity. Your caveman ancestors had to aggressively guard a single piece of fruit, or, well, they simply died. Fast forward to 2026, and that exact same biological survival circuit is being triggered by a digital bank balance on your phone. It's wild. It makes every single everyday expense feel like a mortal threat, and every solid investment feel like some incredibly dangerous gamble.
And listen, this biological glitch has real, measurable consequences. Here's the hard data straight from the lab. 13 people who are operating in this active scarcity mode lose an average of 13 IQ points. Let that sink in. Your cognitive function literally drops when you're actively stressing about scarcity. That is the intellectual equivalent of losing an entire night of sleep just because you looked at a price tag. Clinically, we define this 13-point drop as cognitive narrowing. It's basically a mental tunneling effect. You become so incredibly hyper-focused on the immediate pain of, say, a $4 expense today, that you are completely blinded to the massive long-term growth of your investment engine that we built back in week 7. You completely lose sight of the horizon because you're too busy staring at your shoes.
Phase 3. We desperately need a patch for this outdated software. So let's step into the tech lab and introduce the antidote, the abundance framework.
Now, let me be incredibly clear here. The abundance framework is not some toxic positivity trend or a fluffy self-help mantra. No way. It is a calculated, deeply data-backed economic strategy. It's the fundamental recognition that value in the real world is created, not merely divided up. This framework is exactly how we flip the switch from defensively guarding our resources to offensively growing them. Check this out. When you're stuck in scarcity, your core question is always, what is this costing me? You're fixated entirely on the cost of the seed. But the second we install the abundance framework, that question completely shifts to, what is the ROI on this? You start looking at the yield of the harvest. When you automate money into your index fund, you aren't losing cash. You're buying future time. When you pay to learn a new skill, like we talked about in week 15, you're increasing your input. It is a total paradigm shift.
Phase 4. But of course, there's always a complication, right? Installing this new framework means we have to overcome one massive psychological hurdle.
And the root of this complication is what we call the zero-sum fallacy. It's this deeply ingrained, totally incorrect belief that for you to win, someone else's slice of the pie must shrink. It implies that wealth is just this fixed, limited resource, and if you take a bigger slice, you're essentially stealing from someone else.
Honestly, this fallacy is the root cause of subconscious fear of success that holds so many lab members back from their true potential. We need to completely debunk that idea right now. The economy is an expanding engine of human innovation. We aren't just sitting around dividing up one single pie. We are literally building kitchens and baking entirely new pies. By building your wealth, you are actually providing the necessary capital for companies to solve complex problems, hire more people, and invent new technology. So the big takeaway here is that your personal wealth is simply a byproduct of the value you're providing to the world. The economic pie is constantly getting bigger. And once your brain truly absorbs this fact, that the system is expansive, not restrictive, you can finally exit that exhausting survival circuit. You can stop guarding your one little slice and start growing the whole bakery.
All right, Phase 5. Time for practical application. Let's outline the official clinical trial for week 19.
Your task this week is to execute a deliberate pattern interrupt out in the real world. Here are your 3 steps. Step 1, identify your specific scarcity trigger. You know, that one purchase that always makes you feel guilty even when your financial data shows you can easily afford it. Step 2, force your brain to reframe that specific cost into an investment. Really look for the ROI. And step 3, go to your local coffee shop or somewhere similar and intentionally tip 25% on a small purchase.
Why are we doing this? Because this small, calculated act of excess sends a wildly powerful physical signal to your brain. It tells your nervous system that you are no longer in survival mode. You're no longer hoarding a single piece of fruit in a cave. You are an owner. I want you to actively lean in and experience the feeling of being the person who gives, rather than just the person who nervously guards.
As you run this experiment this week, I want you to ask yourself a question. How do small daily actions create massive net worth ripples? Because next week, we're taking everything we've learned and entering the Compound Habits Lab. We're going to measure exactly how these tiny, everyday pattern interrupts and small actions begin to create massive, exponential net worth ripples over time. So make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next protocol, and stay focused in the lab.